So this is the September Testament, which is the first printing of Martin Luther's translation of the New Testament from Greek into German. It was printed in 1522 in Wittenberg, Germany by Melchior Lotter. It sold wildly, and in fact so much so that Luther issued a second edition in December of 1522, which conveniently is called the December Testament. And it's a real landmark for a number of reasons. First, of course, is in the development of the Bible. This is the first time that the Bible had been translated from Greek into a vernacular language. The Vulgate had been translated a number of times into a number of vernacular languages. In fact, some say that there are as many as 17 German translations of the Bible preceding Martin Luther's work. The key difference, of course, there is that Luther does not translate the Latin Vulgate into German. Rather, he goes back to the Greek, the language that the New Testament was originally written in, and translates that into his modern German translation. The translation itself took him about 9 months to do so, but it would take him another 9 or 10 years to translate the rest of the Bible, which would eventually be printed in the 1530s. The book is also significant not only as a translation of the Bible, but as a development in the German language itself. So at the time, there were many German dialects, and one of the things that this book does is really begin the centralization and formation of what we might think of as a modern German language. So in many ways, it's significant as a religious book, but also as a cultural and linguistic marker within the German-speaking territory of the 16th century. Now, the translation of the Bible, of course, was part of a much larger period of reform within religion, so that people could read it and to, in some sense, remove it from the hands of the church and to give the people the ability to interpret the Bible, was part of Luther's theological program, which was really about removing any kind of separation between God and the believer. This book itself is an innovation as a translation and as a Bible, but the particular copy that Pitt's Theology Library owns is a really interesting technological innovation, if you might. Books at the time were printed and bound as a separate process. So one might go to a printer, purchase the text block of a book, but then have the option to go to his or her favorite binder and have that text bound. And oftentimes, people who bought a copy might have a particular work bound with other works, showing that these were being read together or in some sense had a relationship with one another. So the Pitt's Theology Library copy of the September Testament is a particularly interesting example of this technique. We refer to these as Sammlbands, or works that are bound together. So in this case, Martin Luther's translation of the New Testament is bound with a copy of the German sermons of Johannes Tauler, who was a 14th century German mystic and who had great influence on Luther. We know that Luther widely read these sermons. And so what we see in a book here with the binding of Luther's Bible with the sermons of Tauler is an acknowledgement by whoever owned this book in the 16th century to say these two go together. The German mystical tradition, of which Tauler is certainly a representative, was wildly popular really in the German-speaking territories at the time. And so Luther, who comes up as an Augustinian monk, would have had exposure to the sermons of Tauler because he's in this German-speaking area. But when Luther develops his own kind of theological viewpoint, he really highlights some of these pieces of the mystical tradition that I think inform his understanding of the relationship of the believer to God. So one of these ideas we see particularly prominent in Luther's translation and exposition of the Psalms is this idea of the hiddenness of God. That is, God cannot be discovered through human elements, but really God can only be discovered through moving inward, for the believer kind of reflecting and meditating on God. So as significant as this book is, one thing that's quite surprising to many readers is how plain the title page. Oftentimes, title pages at the time were highly decorated, highly ornamental, but in fact, the title page of the September Testament is rather simple. It simply says the New Testament, German, and then it says Wittenberg, the town in Germany where it was printed. Luther's name itself does actually not appear on the title page. Another point of controversy or point of interest around the production of this Bible is the table of contents itself. Luther translates all 27 books of the New Testament, but Luther, projecting his own kind of theological proclivities, separates the 27 books into two very distinct categories, and that's very evident on the title page itself. So of the 27 books of the New Testament, Luther provides a number, 1 to 23, for only the first 23. But the final 4 are physically separated from the others on the title page and are not even given the benefit of a numbering system. They are in fact just standing there alone. And it's these texts the book of Hebrews, the book of Jude, the book of James, and the book of Revelation, that though Luther deemed them canonical, did not exactly align with his theological viewpoint. And so here on the title page, you see Luther not so subtly saying, these are in the New Testament, but it's really these 23 that are the most significant. The book itself is also an innovation in illustrations. There are many woodcut images that accompany the text. The most significant of these are the ones that are found in the book of Revelation. So alongside Luther's translation of the book of Revelation into German, you have these full-page woodcuts done by the German artist Lucas Cranach. One of the great powers that Luther had was the power of propaganda, or of translating his theological ideas into forms that other people could understand, and imagery is a key way in which he does this. A very famous example of this is Cranach's image of the Whore of Babylon, where you have the Whore of Babylon seated on the dragon, a scene from the book of Revelation, but there's a subtle polemic going on here, for as we see, the whore herself is wearing a triple-tiered tiara. And there was only one person at that time who would have worn a triple-tiered tiara, and that was the Pope of the Catholic Church. So here, in a very not subtle way, you have Luther making a commentary about the Roman Catholic Church. This illustration was quite controversial, as one might imagine. In fact, so much so that when Luther issues a second edition of this Bible in December, just 3 months later, that triple-tiered tiara has been reduced down to a single-tiered tiara, making a less overt political commentary about the Pope. The Luther Bible is still the Bible in German-speaking territories today. Now, of course, that text has changed, the German language has evolved, but what's so important about this translation is it really does become the kind of through line of Germans reading the Bible. So the Protestant church, the Lutheran church in Germany, in many ways is still reading Luther's Bible. And so Martin Luther is, for many people in German parts of the world, not only a religiously significant figure, but also a kind of cultural hallmark, one who is the father of the German language, the father of the German Bible, and the father of the German church. At Pitt's Theology Library, we are privileged to have this book. It is an incredibly rare book. There are only about 30 copies that exist in the world. In fact, as we often say, it's rarer than the Gutenberg. This is part of our Richard C. Kessler Reformation collection, which I think in North America you will find no better collection documenting the reforms of Luther and the responses in the 16th century. We're privileged to own this book because two predecessors before me, Dr. Channing Jeske, had an opportunity to purchase the book from a dealer in Germany. As the story goes, the Kessler collection had just been founded, and when this opportunity came up from a dealer, Dr. Jeske reached out to his donors and said, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that we cannot pass up. Our donors generously donated the funds to acquire the book, and as the story goes, Dr. Jeske flew to Germany, bought an extra seat on the plane, and had the Septuagint Testament sitting next to him as he brought it back, just to make sure it came here safe and sound.